Welcome back to Tennis Unfiltered with me, James Gray of the iNewspaper and inews.co.uk. I've got George Bellshaw with me, live from London for once. I am live from Scotland as I prepare for one of my best friend's weddings. We're going to look back at day 4 at the US Open. Second round finally in the books. Everything is now a little bit more simple. I always think, George, and you'll remember this from the days of writing and reporting on Grand Slams, once you get through the first 4 days, everything gets a little bit easier. The number of matches on Friday is a quarter of the number that there were on Monday, and things are a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just easier to keep track and remember roughly who's where in what draw. I think sometimes you're kind of expected to have like an all-encompassing, omniscient knowledge of draws, etc. It's like, well, I've got rough ideas of who's in what quarter, but then you've got the kind of nomads who's like the 70 in the world. But like, I don't know where they are. They could be playing anyone next.
Yeah, exactly.
From like third or fourth round, you sort of are like, okay, this is who's going to play there, and this is what's happening after that. It all becomes a little bit more straightforward.
Absolutely. Well, I thought we should start. I never like to start on a low note, but it feels like the biggest news, especially for you, George, because I know you were very high on Matteo Berrettini's chances in the tournament this year. Really sort of tough scenes to watch. As we saw, last night, this morning. I'm not going to try and describe time, it's too complicated. But he was left court in a wheelchair, having injured his ankle, pretty, screaming in pain. And I kind of thought as much screaming pain, but also in frustration, because an ankle roll is just something that can happen to anyone. And, he's been through so many injuries that didn't necessarily happen to anyone, and this one happened to him.
Yeah. I mean, you are in some ways more vulnerable to injury when you have had other injuries, I would say. If you've not been kind of active playing a lot of matches, or I don't know. I mean, I think people sometimes really underestimate the kind of difference between a kind of training session versus like actual match play as well. Like that extra kind of 5% that it takes to kind of get out to big shots or think about it, and that's where things like ankles are actually incredibly vulnerable comparatively. Like if you've not been kind of going through those motions. He's not played that many matches. I think he's played pretty well this year considering how few matches he's been able to play. And that's kind of why I was thinking this section of the draw could open up and he could be the man to kind of slide through it. And in many ways I was right. The section has opened up.
But I was wrong. Her catch both out, yeah.
But unfortunately for Berrettini, it's not happened for him here, and yeah, it's a shame because I think we've spoken a bit about who our ideal top 10 is, and I think Berrettini is in my ideal top 10 at the minute. I think he's a very, very good player who plays in a very interesting, dynamic style that does make for good matches compared to some other players at the top of the game. And I think because he's got big weapons and quite an aggressive serve and forehand style against someone like Medvedev, for example, or Djokovic, that is an interesting matchup to see who can kind of get the better of attack versus defence. So I think he's a good person to kind of have that high, and it's just a shame to see his body failing him at the moment.
And let's not beat around the bush, George. It does help that he's a brilliant looking bloke and the clothes look good on him, and like I know
abs.
And also those abs. I mean, not to kind of thirst over him too much, but it is something that you kind of have to consider when you're talking about like breaking through and talking to people outside of tennis about tennis. Lots of my friends know who Matteo Berrettini is because, oh yeah, he's the one with the eyes and the hair, and like it does help. It's worse in the women's game, and I think it's more problematic in the women's game because it's more likely that people in the women's game just see them as clothes horses and as models. Whereas I think in the men's game, the world tends to see them as sportsmen and models. But it's something that you still kind of have to consider, I'm afraid. As you mentioned, George, that section of the draw has opened up. Karen Khachanov went out in the first round. Hubert Hurkacz lost to Jack Draper, which on paper, a very good win for Jack Draper to win 2-4 and 5. But it seems that this stomach bug that's been going around, which some people think may be COVID, no matter what it is, Hubert Hurkacz looked pretty drained by it, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. I thought he he battled on pretty well, all things considered. He was really kind of struggling for breath in that third set. But look, that's not to take anything away from Jack. I think I probably would have been less high on picking Hurkacz if I thought Draper was coming into this tournament fit and firing, because he's a major, major threat in a similar way to Berrettini is. He's got huge weapons, particularly that big kind of lefty serve out wide and very heavy shots. And I think I would say for Draper as well, he's got a very good mentality, and the only thing that's stopped him making that jump towards the top 20 has been his body. And that is an ongoing concern, and we're coming to a point there's new territory for him now. He should probably reach the fourth round now. It's a glorious third round
Michael
draw.
Moe, for sure. Moe. Who's a nice guy and a really good player, but Draper would dream of that kind of draw. Just to mention, George, sorry to interrupt you, but it should be noted that Draper talked yesterday, or after his match to say, about the fact that the injury he suffered in Winston-Salem during his match against Tallinn Export is in fact a small tear in his shoulder. They've scanned it. They say it's manageable. But given that's also the injury that ruled him out the whole grass season, it does fill me with dread, to be honest.
Yeah, and it's such a shame because, Michael Moe, third round, an out-of-form Rublev, round 4, that's a great chance to reach the quarterfinals of a Grand Slam.
And then he's playing like Medvedev or de Minaur, and it's like, there's nothing to say he can't win that.
Yeah.
I don't want to get overly carried away, but, But the fitness thing really.
But we both know the equally likely outcome is he's going to damage this shoulder further and withdraw against Michael Moe in the second set, and that's the sad reality at the minute for Draper. I hope that doesn't happen.
He says he's serving within himself. He says he can still do 1-2-5, but he can't do
that's not bad. I can't do that.
He can't do the 1-3-2 or 1-3-5 that he has done in the past. But yeah, really fascinating section of the draw that now, section 4. I also want to talk about Andy Murray, George, which lots of people will be talking about. We were quite high on him against Grigor Dimitrov. In his words, he didn't play well, he didn't serve well, he didn't return well. It's pretty hard to win matches if you do that.
Yeah. I mean, I'd said before the match, didn't I, that if he plays as he did against Tsitsipas, he can win that match. And the sad reality is he didn't come anywhere near that, both in quality, intensity, and kind of tactical tweaks. I thought the first set was quite interesting. It was very long. Like, I think, sometimes you look at the scoreline and you think, oh, God, that he's really rolled him there. But if you watch that first set, it was tight. It was close. It was long. It was, I can't remember the exact time, but it took them about 45 minutes to go through 5 games or something. That is symptomatic of a pretty close match between two well-matched opponents. Unfortunately for Murray, from that point onwards, it kind of went away from him. And there's always two ways you can look at it, isn't there? You can be positive about Dimitrov having a bit of a better day, but actually I'm quite negative about Murray, and I think he was a bit downbeat, and I understand why. I think he feels he should win this match, and that's, he should have beaten Tsitsipas, and he's not winning these matches, and that's worrying for me now, because time's not on his side.
No, I think what he said afterwards is pretty interesting, because he said, I want to get better. I still enjoy the work. I enjoy everything that goes with being a pro. That's what keeps me going, trying to improve. He says, if things change and I stop enjoying that, or my results, my ranking and everything start to go backwards in that respect, and in a few months' time I was ranked 60 in the world or whatever, instead of moving up, things might change. I mean, I've always said, and I have said it for a few weeks and months now, I think this is his last US Open. I can't see his ranking going forward. I can't see him making the second week of a slam. And even he sort of hinted at that yesterday, saying, I don't know whether second weeks of slams are for me, or words to that effect. And I think he'll play Wimbledon, he'll play the Olympics, and then that'll be it. And I'm fairly confident of that now, especially having seen both the result last night and the way he reacted to it.
Yeah, I mean, I always do approach a Murray conference with some caution after a loss like this, because he can make quite grand sweeping statements. But there has been an element of defiance, hasn't there, in previous big losses? A bit of a, I still can do this. And at times he's sort of talked me into it as well, even though I've probably been the firmest doubter of him, I think I would say on our podcast, of saying I just don't think he can actually ever go that far. Or maybe Calvin try and claim that as well, but he doubts everyone, so that doesn't count. But you know, there were signs he was playing really good stuff on the grass again. Even against kind of quite weak opposition in the tournament he won coming into Wimbledon. He still looked quite fleet-footed, quite fresh, and you know, I think that loss against Tsitsipas was a disaster in this stage of Andy Murray's career. That was a great draw for him. He was playing good stuff. It was a very winnable match. You know, in a different universe, if Wimbledon start that day an hour earlier, as they bloody should have been doing, he finishes that off and he wins it. You know, I know that's an easy thing to sit here and say 3 months after the fact, but
no, he would say the
small
same.
Margins.
Yeah.
It's really, really small. And
it is small margins.
You know, this isn't a great defeat on paper, but it's only 2 months ago he's lost to the world number 5 to 7 in a match he could have won. So his level's not far off it, but is that good enough for someone like Murray? I don't know. I think he's probably sick of this by now, to be honest.
One man who's not sick of it and still clearly loves the game is Stan Wawrinka, who is the oldest man in the third round of the US Open since Jimmy Connors, who was 39 when he made it back in 1991. I mean, I think probably if you told me 15 years ago or even 10 years ago that Stan Wawrinka would still be playing top-level tennis at the age of 38, given his social life and stature, I would have been pretty surprised. But it's kind of... I do wonder whether, like, he has an advantage in that, like, he's never been in the best shape. He's always been quite fit, but, you know, he's had that kind of, you know, a bit of chunk about him. And I do wonder whether, you know, that means that when he's got a bit older and it's harder to stay thin, or, you know, we both know that, George, metabolism slows down once you hit 30. I do wonder whether actually he's like, okay, well, this is the shape I am and I'm just going to work bloody hard. And he's still got that phenomenal ball striking. And what it really makes me think is, imagine if Stan Wawrinka had been 10 years younger, 10 years older, and had been like in his peak just around the end of Sampras and beginning of Federer. I'm sure he'd have won like 10 slams.
I love that thought puzzle. I mean, I think you're kind of right there. I think the easier thing for Stan in some ways is he's never really viewed himself as the top guy in the game. Like, I know he's won 3 slams, but yeah, he was always number 5 really in terms of people's interest, and even some of his slam wins, he wasn't playing like that well on the tour necessarily. He just can get shit hot. His ball striking is so good that he can do it, and I think there's a degree to that actually helps playing quite late on, in the sense of, you know, you do just enjoy it. You don't take it as seriously as maybe like a Rafa or a Roger. I mean, they're all going pretty late anyway, so it's probably a bit of an unfair thing to say that it's harder for them to carry on. But I think it's harder for someone like Murray than it is for Wawrinka to be dueling around it. I'm fairly sure Wawrinka loses to Sinner next round. I mean, that'd be a bad loss for Sinner if he doesn't win that. But I think that will be fine for Wawrinka. You know, it's been another good week. He's had another good bit of fun in New York, I'm sure. He's
probably not yet.
Once a big match. Yeah, I think he just likes the lifestyle, doesn't he? And who can blame him, to be honest? I mean, like, if we were, you know, in his position, we'd probably still be willing to kick around for a couple more years until it's actually impossible to do it, I reckon.
Especially if you're not having to work that hard. I mean, yeah. I'm being a bit unfair. Like, I know he does work hard. And, you know, work hard, play hard. I think we would all live that lifestyle, as you say, George, if we possibly could. Let's move on. I mean, I should also note that in the British sense, Cam Norrie is through to the third round, as is Dan Evans. Norrie beat the qualifier Shu in straight sets. Dan Evans came from a set down, lost first set 6-1, and then won it 1-3 and 3 against Botic van der Zandschulp, who I think wasn't super well himself, in fairness, but Yeah, Evans up against Alcaraz. I mean, in a word, Calvin, in a word, George, I compliment you there. Can Dan Evans beat Alcaraz?
It's probably no. What I would say, though, is that I do think Evans poses a slightly different challenge to what Alcaraz may be used to playing and might just give him something to think about. I think Alcaraz wins in straight sets, but I wouldn't be surprised if Evans made it a little bit tricky at times.
I think the problem is going to be backhand slice against inside out or inside in forehand. Yeah. And Alcaraz is just going to be like backing into the backhand corner and then just picking which corner to pin ever into. I think that's going to be the problem.
We should really have, as we spoke at the start of the tournament, with the Alcaraz versus two Brits in a row, because it's hard to see Norrie losing to Arnaldi, who's had a remarkably kind draw.
Yeah, he had a walkover against Kubler and then 5 sets against Arthur Fils, who had just played 5 sets himself. I mean, yeah, it's gone pretty well, that, I think. But, I have heard people talk about Matteo Arnaldi, like, in very favourable terms, and he won a round at the French, and I think he came through qualifying at Wimbledon, maybe. So, I know Damien Couste, who's the best guy on Twitter to follow if you want to know about Challenger tennis. Yeah. I know he's very keen on him, and I think he's won 3 Challenger titles this year on Aldi, 2 on clay, 1 on hard. So, I don't know.
Not to be sniffed at then.
No sniffing.
Good coffee if Norrie loses to emerging Italian stallion.
Good coffee? What's good coffee?
Copy.
Oh, copy. Sorry. I was like, is this like some new phrase? Like, oh, yeah, that's bang on. That's good coffee. Yeah, right on. Really weird. Okay, I should also mention another Brit, which is our beautiful segue into the women. Katie Boulter came from a set down to beat Wong Yafan, which is a great result and really good for her. Great for her ranking, great points.
What's she up to now?
I'm really hoping you wouldn't ask me that question, George, because I haven't got the live rankings open.
It's a very winnable third round as well. I mean,
she's up to 50 in the world in the live rankings, which is pretty remarkable, really. It's not someone we probably ever thought was going to be a top 50 player. You say it's very winnable, George. She's playing Peyton Stearns, who is the NCAA champion, and I think is not to be underestimated. She had a good run to the third round of the French as well, so she can play. And I know people in American college tennis who really do rate her, so I think I would just be a little bit hesitant to write her off immediately.
Yeah, winnable is always, in my mind, not playing someone like Rybakina, Sabalenka, Swiatek, or a very established top end. But
fair enough.
Not to disrespect.
Yeah, they did play earlier on the year, actually, in I think an ITF event, and it was 3 tie breaks. So they're clearly well matched. Just depends who's made more progress.
And also, can I just say as well, whoever wins that match, I think's got potentially a very winnable 4th round against the world's
either Alexandrova or
champion or Alexandrova. I think that's winnable as well. So I think there's a good opportunity in this section.
I think Vondrousova's going under the radar, mate. I think she's going to do 2 in a row.
Could do it.
2 in a row. Well, it's not impossible. Not impossible. We're not really any closer to knowing who's going to win the women's draw, are we? Like, Świątek's cruised through, which I guess maybe allays any fears you might have had about her, mental and physical well-being. Sabalenka's cruised through, and Rybakina has only played 1 match because she got a walkover against Tomljanovic. So I don't really want to talk about who's going to win the women's draw very much, because I don't feel that we know any more than we did 4 days ago, unless you disagree, George.
Yeah, no, I don't really disagree. I think Sabalenka's first 2 matches, we could have just written those scores out, and that's what we'd have guessed, really.
Yeah.
Similar Swiatek. In fact, Saville probably got about 4 more games than I expected she would get.
She got 7, yeah.
Tomljanovic would have been the one that would have been the most interesting match on paper.
Because she's such a good returner of serve as well.
Yeah. So, but the next round's quite good. I mean, Kaya Juvan kind of back, playing some good stuff.
She's good mates with Świątek as well.
Yeah, so it could be interesting. Castella, is widely experienced. I'd still expect
classic tricky third round, Sorana Castella. The Kaya Kanepi of the third round.
Sabalenka will thrash Burrell, I suspect. But
okay. I'm looking forward to an upset there now already. The only other thing, well, I want to mention Sophia Kenin, who is out and was mostly held together by tape. I think on her shoulder and her thigh. And I just wanted to mention it, George, because you said you thought she was back, and I wanted to humiliate you a little bit. So, but I don't actually
winning matches, which I suppose is better than she was.
I don't take any pleasure in that though, because it's a shame. She's obviously just got a body that is really struggling. The very final thing I want to talk about, George, because it's something we talked about earlier in the year at the French and at Wimbledon, is Alina Svitolina, who, I mean, for someone who I wasn't always, and I heard Catherine Whitaker say this morning on the tennis podcast, and I did agree with her. She said, she was someone who I never really thought about as being like a box office player. And she's turned into this box office player. Like, her matches are always exciting. Anyway, there's also often controversy. She came from a set down to beat Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova, another person who I believe has come back from having a child. I think that's right. And there was no handshake at the end. Pavlyuchenkova is Russian, Svitolina is Ukrainian. She said that's what she's going to do. And there was no booing. And crucially, it's because, the WTA put out a statement a few weeks ago saying, look, this is what Ukrainian players are going to do. Please respect it. And then when Svitolina was serving for the match, they put a message on the screen saying, please respect the decision of both players not to shake hands, because of the political dispute. Or I can't remember the exact words they used, but, they said, shut it, you lot. And in fairness, they did. And it's just like, okay, we should say well done to the US Open organisers, but we should also say, how did no one work out this was the thing they should have done like months ago? Months. Like, it happened at the French, and I'm not expecting Roland Garros to intervene because they're bloody useless. But you'd think the All England would look at that and go, would be embarrassing if that happened here. Should we try and nip it in the bud early? And of course they didn't. And, so credit to USTA, I think, George.
Yeah, it's something that's kind of been rolled out on the tour a bit since that Azarenka incident, hasn't it? So, it's obviously a good move. I mean, I'm fairly sure the All England club weren't viewing it like this, but in terms of a story, that was definitely one of the more memorable ones. So maybe there was something to kind of leaving it in there for a bit of intrigue, if you like.
Yeah, agreed. That's all I've got on my list, George, but I wanted you to sort of pick out maybe one match in each draw that you're really looking forward to. I've got a couple that I think are going to be really interesting. I'll go first.
I've got my women's one. Really.
I know what you're going to say. I think. Are you going to say Bouzkova Jabeur?
No, it wasn't. The two wild cards. The bounce back Wozniacki versus Brady.
Okay. Brady's not technically a wild card, by the way. I think she's protected ranking.
Oh, protected ranking. I'll take it all back.
Shove it.
Yes, you're right. Protected ranking. But you know what I mean. I think that's quite a good match.
Okay. Well, I think Jabeur-Bouzkova could be fun. That wasn't going to be the one I was going to pick. That was just my prediction for you, because you always pick Bouzkova in everything. But mine is Muchova-Taylor Townsend, both of whom are in the can't get worse selection. And I love watching Muchova anyway. She's a great person. Taylor Townsend is a brilliant person. Anyone who saw her give Leylah Fernandez a pep talk after losing the French Open doubles final and who heard what she said, she's an amazing person, Taylor Townsend. I really do think that. And what about the men's, George? You've got a men's third round match you're really looking forward to?
Yeah, I've got a little short list. I think from pure tennis terms, I'm quite interested to see where Zverev's at against Dimitrov. I think that'll be interesting if he can start making a case for himself heading into that match with Sinner. And I kind of think that match could be good news for Alcaraz. I think Zverev is capable of beating Sinner.
Right.
Which might prove quite consequential going forward.
You're assuming that Wawrinka's not going to beat Sinner in the third round?
I am very much assuming that.
Okay.
And I would love to be wrong in some ways. Although in other ways, I think we would quite like Alcaraz Sinner from a
storytelling point of view, I think so, yeah.
I think Yari Dimonor could be okay.
Yeah, I looked at that and thought two quite different styles, contrasting styles. It would be quite interesting.
And I think the other two, I'd kind of say the two American blokes we both are quite hot on in sections 5 and 6 are both coming into their first quite interesting challenges. So Manarino will try and kind of almost bore TFO into submission in quite tricky ways. And that's just a good test for TFO's concentration as much as anything. But I think that's a first bit of a test here. He's playing really good stuff. Thrashed Offner, who we thought might be a test as well. But probably my pick in terms of entertainment and fun is the other one, which is Tommy Paul v Davidovich Fokina.
Yeah, that will be
entertaining. It's a really good matchup.
I think you've missed it, George.
Is mental.
I think you've missed
Shelton Karatsev.
Shelton Karatsev, come on. I mean, that is just the obvious one, maybe. I mean, honestly, just going through the draw, it's a hell of a good third round. Like, there's almost no match without... Okay, I don't have a lot to say about Stricker Bonzi.
I think the final two sections probably let the side down a little bit, but...
Yeah, maybe.
Still some intrigue.
Well, Jakub Menchik, happy birthday, Jakub Menchik.
Happy
because
birthday.
it is his 18th birthday today, and he's going to celebrate by playing Taylor Fritz.
He took the drog out. Sad times.
Yeah, he did take the drog out. It's sad indeed. I think he's playing Taylor Fritz on Arthur Ashe on his 18th birthday, which there's
That's
also
cool.
some fabulous kind of symmetry there, because Taylor Fritz also came onto tour at a very young age, turned 18 on tour. So, yeah, really interesting. And Taylor Fritz is basically one of the favourites. Well, he's a hot favourite to make the quarterfinals, and then he's got to play Djokovic. So, might be quite happy to get a little bit of a test.
Are you telling me you think Djokovic is going to struggle to beat one of Laszlo Djere, Yuri Vesely, or Bojan Gojo? Actually, Vesely is one to keep your eye on, because he's got, I swear, he's one of the only players on tour who actually holds a winning head-to-head record against Novak.
Yeah, but he also doesn't look like a tennis player. So
it's like the weirdest matchup. Novak just seems to always slip up. So
yeah, we'll see.
The curse of Vesely goes on. Potentially.
I'm battering you in fantasy tennis now, George. I've taken a huge
My
lead.
team got absolutely decimated. Bloody Isner. 2 sets up and frigging threw it away.
Yeah. Interesting, just a little tidbit from that, by the way. Michael Moe said he was really struggling to pick John Isner's serve, and Ben Shelton was watching and gave him a few tips, which is a classic example of you can coach from wherever you want as long as you're not sat in the coaching box.
That's disgraceful.
Exactly.
So it's Ben Shelton I have to blame for my...
There you go. Ben Shelton, not only the best player coming through, also the best coach coming through, it turns out. There you go. You heard it here first. Right, that's all we've got time for on Tennis Unfiltered. You sent loads of emails, and I'm grateful for them, and we will get to them maybe in the next daily episode. But come back and find out. That's all I can tell you to do. Come back next week, or even tomorrow.